goals of this lecture are: we'll cover epidemiology of hypertension, we'll also cover pathophysiology of hypertension and the role of the kidney, we'll cover the pathophysiological consequences of hypertension, we'll discuss diagnosis and therapy of hypertension, we'll also discuss some of the recent controversies that are discussed in hypertension, and finally we will also look at future directions in the management of hypertension. So what you have to remember is that hypertension is one of the most common disease a physician sees in his office in most of the countries in the world. Okay, by far it beats other diseases like hyperlipidemia, diabetes, and asthma, and all other diseases. And as a result of this, hypertension causes immense damage to human beings, causing very high cardiovascular and renal mortality and morbidity in individuals who have hypertension. Now, the biggest problem with the management of hypertension is that people who have hypertension, patients who have hypertension, are not aware that they have hypertension. And in this slide you can see it's a sample of several surveys conducted in several countries, which shows that the awareness of hypertension is very low. Here you can see in the Indian setting, the urban setting, the awareness is only 38% of patients who have hypertension know they have hypertension. In rural setting, only 27% of the patients who have hypertension know they have hypertension. And what about the treatment? 91% of those who are aware in the urban setting get treatment, but only 84% of those who have hypertension get treated. Now, what about the control of hypertension? Among Indians, those who have hypertension, only 30% are controlled in the urban areas, and 31% are controlled in the rural areas. So this is a sample, and if you look at the American surveys, also similar results are seen. Prevalence of hypertension in India. The surveys that have been done in the Indian population are very sketchy. So, but overall there's a feeling that the prevalence of hypertension is probably 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 among Indians. And we all know from the Framingham study that as we become older, we all get hypertension. And then in certain ethnic groups, especially in US, they found that African Americans, the blacks, they have more hypertension than other races. And as you all know, that the primary hypertension, or what we call as the so-called essential hypertension, is found in 95% of the patients who are diagnosed with hypertension, and only 5% of the patients have what we call as the secondary hypertension, and we'll go into more details later in this lecture. What are the factors that affect the management of hypertension? Several factors affect the management of hypertension in hypertensive patients. They could be patient factors as well as physician factors. What are the patient factors? So the patients may not be compliant or adherent to the recommendations given by the physicians. For example, you tell them to take the medications, they don't buy the medications, they don't take these medications on time, or they may not take the medications, all the medications that you have written to them. Physician factors. Therapeutic inertia is a huge problem among patients, among physicians who treat patients with hypertension. And what is therapeutic inertia? A patient comes into your office, you evaluate him, you see that his blood pressure is elevated, but still you do not increase his medication or optimize his antihypertensive care. And in several surveys done in United States and published in major journals, they have found that in one of the surveys especially, they found that these patients came to clinic at least 3 times during the year. All the 3 times their blood pressure were elevated, not at goal, and still when they audited at the end of the year, they audited these charts, they found that the blood pressure, that there was no change in the management of antihypertensive medication. They did not increase the dose of medication, or they did not add any medications to this patient. to these patients. So physician therapeutic inertia is an important factor that leads to uncontrolled hypertension. The guidelines for controlling hypertension, there are several international guidelines. One of the best one is the JNC7 that we call, that was released by National Institute of Health in United States in 2003. So what's essential hypertension? What's primary hypertension? Essential hypertension is in a way misnomer. This name comes because for years, even after knowing that there is this disease called hypertension, the experts thought that it was a natural compensatory mechanisms that were occurring that were leading to elevated blood pressure. And they thought that as we grow old, our arteries become stiff, so we require more pressure so that the blood could flow to the end organs and perfuse the end organs. And they even thought that if you reduce the blood pressure, if you treat hypertension, you will cause more damage than any benefit to them. So this is a famous quote by Dr. Hay that was published in British Medical Journal, who thought that the greatest danger to a man with high blood pressure lies in its discovery, because then some fool is certain to try and reduce it. But now we know that this is wrong, and this is utterly wrong, and the patients with hypertension need to be treated to reduce their cardiovascular and renal morbidity and mortality. The best study for this came out in 2003. It was published 2002. It was published in Lancet. What they did was, this was a meta-analysis of 63 randomized controlled trials that included 1 million patients in the study. And what they found was that as our blood pressure starts to go up, the mortality from cardiovascular disease increases. And there are other studies that have shown that those who have higher blood pressure have worsening renal diseases. So it is important to bring down the blood pressure in patients who have hypertension and to control them to goal. Now, who gets hypertension? A very frequent patient question to a physician is, why did I get hypertension? So Framingham study showed, this was a study published by Dr. Shashikala Vasan in JAMA in 2002, which showed that if we live for 15 years beyond the age of 60 years, 95% of us will develop hypertension, and this is evidence-based and shown in Framingham study. So what's the pathophysiology and pathogenesis of hypertension? So as you all know, blood pressure is the product of cardiac output and total peripheral resistance. But then the features that affect maintaining this blood pressure are controlled by kidney. And it was elegantly shown by Dr. Dahl in his paper in 1974. What he did was, there are two kinds of rats, laboratory rats. One is the Dahl salt-sensitive rat, and the other rat is salt-resistant rat. What Dr. Dahl did was, so in the salt-sensitive rat, you give them a little bit of salt in their diet, they immediately develop hypertension. While in the salt-resistant rat, if you give them any amount of salt, they will never develop hypertension. What Dr. Dahl did was, he transplanted a kidney from salt-sensitive rat to salt-resistant rat, and also transplanted a kidney from salt-resistant rat to salt-sensitive rat. And what he showed was that the rat that was salt-resistant earlier, now once it gets this kidney from the salt-resistant rat, you give him a little bit of salt, and he also and this rat also develops hypertension. So kidney plays an important role in the development of hypertension. And similar studies have been shown in some case reports are there where the patient who did not have hypertension and had renal failure got transplanted where the donor who gave this kidney was hypertensive. So after getting the kidney from the donor who was hypertensive, the patient also developed hypertension. So generally, it is well accepted now that kidney plays a major role and hypertension travels with the kidney. So further studies have been done to pinpoint what genes could cause hypertension, and up till now it's not been very successful. What we know that at the baseline it is the salt transport, sodium transport in the kidney that plays a major role in the development of hypertension. So there are several studies now looking at genetic diseases that cause hypertension. So there is a syndrome called Liddle syndrome, where once again the salt transporter is hyperfunctioning, which causes increased reabsorption of salt from the tubules in the kidney, leading to severe hypertension. There are other diseases like Barter's and Gitelman syndrome, where the transporters that reabsorb sodium are not working. So these patients lose sodium in their urine and they are always hypotensive. So we know from these syndromes of hypertension and hypotension that salt transporters in the tubules of the kidney play an important role, and probably they are one of the reasons that lead to development of what we know as primary or essential hypertension too. For this, Dr. Arthur C. Guyton, the famous physiologist, published Guyton's hypothesis in the late 60s. What he said was, in this hypothesis, that as we grow older, the tubules, the transporters in the kidney stop functioning efficiently, which leads us to reabsorb more sodium than we would. As a result of higher sodium levels in the body, there is increase in body water content, and this raises the pressure. Okay? Normally, this pressure is enough to cause natriuresis, and we lose the salt in the urine, and our blood pressure is stabilized and salt content is stabilized too. But this doesn't happen as we grow older. Our sodium transporters aren't functioning to their full efficiency, so that now when we eat a little bit more salt than we should, it leads to increase in water and increase in blood pressure. But then, since the salt transporters are inefficient, the pressure natriuresis does not efficiently take place, which leads to development of hypertension. What leads to these alterations in the tubular sodium transport? Not only aging, but certain toxins can cause microvascular disease in the kidney and lead to hypertension, endothelial dysfunction, reduction in the number of nephrons, any systemic hypoxia. These all could change the pathophysiology of the kidney and lead to development of hypertension. What are the major clinical consequences of hypertension? We already know that hypertension causes left ventricular hypertrophy. It leads to coronary artery disease, and then finally it leads to increase in cardiovascular mortality. Same way, it can lead to lacunar infarcts as well as hemorrhagic strokes, and in the kidney it can cause parenchymal ischemia and fibrosis and lead to chronic kidney disease. How would you diagnose a patient with hypertension? When you see a patient with hypertension, you have to take a detailed history, do a complete physical examination, and then measure the blood pressure correctly and do some laboratory investigations. So the focus of history and physical should be to look at the extent of damage hypertension has caused in this patient, and basically you are looking at the target organ damage. So you are looking at, so you'll have to evaluate the signs and symptoms of coronary artery disease, heart failure, CVA, and peripheral vascular disease, and if there are any signs and symptoms of renal disease in these patients. You will also have to do a fundoscopic examination, because that's the only way you could actually look at an artery to see the changes of hypertension and see whether these changes are acute or chronic. You also have to rule out, keep in mind that there are 5% of the patients who have who present with hypertension, the cause is secondary hypertension. So you have to, your history should focus on it, your exam should focus on it, your clinical investigations also should focus on it to make sure you are not missing one of those secondary hypertension. Because the good thing about this diagnosis is that most of the time the hypertension caused because of a secondary disease is curable. You treat the cause and you cure that hypertension. So in the family history, you will ask if there is family history of hypertension or renal disease. You will also ask if there are any signs and symptoms of peripheral vascular disease, because in patients who have renal artery stenosis, they are basically vasculopathies, and they would have had some angina or heart attack, or they would have had a history of stents placed or a history of bypass surgery. So that would be something that you should keep in mind. Moreover, these patients usually present with sudden onset of severe hypertension after the age of 60, or somebody who already had very well controlled hypertension for several years, now suddenly he presents with worsening of hypertension, accelerated hypertension after the age of 60 years, then it may be pointing you towards headaches, sweating and palpitation. It may point to the fact that this patient probably has pheochromocytoma. But still, remember that all the secondary hypertensions, they are only present in 5% of patients who present with general hypertension. You also have to ask whether there was any recent onset of gain in weight, recent onset of diabetes, recent onset of change in facial, change in appearance, like facial hair appearance, because this would be more common in Cushing syndrome. If a patient says that he's been snoring a lot in the night and he is not able to sleep at night, then probably this patient is having sleep apnea, and his blood pressure, his worsening of hypertension could be related to sleep apnea. In other patients, they may present with signs and symptoms of hyper or hypothyroidism, which could lead to worsening of hypertension. So these are some of the important points that you should evaluate in patients to make sure they don't have a secondary cause of hypertension. And another important point that you should keep in mind when you are evaluating these patients is that over-the-counter medications can worsen the hypertension, can cause onset of new hypertension, can worsen the hypertension. So a brief history also on if they have started taking non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medications, because they are known to cause worsening of hypertension. If a patient has recently started taking oral contraceptive pill, that could lead to a worsening of hypertension also. Now, when you are doing the diagnostic evaluation, you should also look at what are the factors in this patient that he needs to change that would help him to improve blood pressure control. And some of those are cardiovascular risk factor. Does he smoke? Is he obese? Is his cholesterol high? Those are the things that you will keep in mind when planning management of these patients. Does he have diabetes mellitus? Is it well controlled or not? If the diabetes is not well controlled, then they have worse peripheral vascular disease and worse arterial disease, which could again worsen blood pressure control. Are they obese? So you need to, because this is very important in lifestyle modification, and we'll cover it later. A sedentary lifestyle. Is he very sedentary? Doesn't he walk? Does he exercise or not? Hyperlipidemia, once again, is his cholesterol controlled or not? These should be kept in mind, because these are the modifiable risk factors that can help improve blood pressure control. When you see a patient when you diagnose a patient with hypertension, if it's a new patient, it is very important that you don't base your diagnosis based on just one reading. Okay, all the guidelines say that the blood pressure should be measured several times on several occasions, and if it is higher than 140 over 90 millimeters of mercury, then management, then they should be branded as hypertensive and the treatment should be started. What is the technique of blood pressure measurement? This is very important. Most of the physicians don't follow these techniques. And the most important point is the patient should have rested for at least 5 minutes in a comfortable chair before you start taking medication. He should not be talking when you are taking medication. He should not have tea or coffee for at least a couple of hours before taking the blood pressure. He should not have smoked for a couple of hours. And he should not have any kind of stress. Sometimes what happens is the patient presents to you, he's been waiting in the corridor for more than 3 hours getting to see you, and now he is stressed. When you check his blood pressure, it is normal to have a elevated blood pressure when you are under stress, but you cannot start treating a patient just based on that higher level of blood pressure. So you have to keep these things in mind. You have to also make sure that your blood pressure device is at the arm's level, and the patient has flat feet on the ground and not sitting in a hunched position. How large should a blood pressure cuff be? So the bladder of the blood pressure should cover at least 80% of the circumference of the arm. This is very important because this could lead to, if the bladder is not, if the size of the cuff is not appropriate, then you will misdiagnose a patient with hypertension. So generally the guidelines say that at least 2 readings should be taken and they should be averaged. The newer guidelines also prefer that the patient monitor blood pressure at home and bring those readings to you. Most of the time it's been seen, if these readings were done based on the guidelines on home blood pressure monitoring, then they are more accurate than the blood pressure that was measured in your office. Another important and elegant device that is now regarded as the gold standard for accurate measurement of blood pressure is a 24-hour blood pressure monitor. So what this does is, it's a cell phone sized device that a patient wears on the arm or on his belt. The patient wears it for exactly 24 hours. During this 24 hours, this device records blood pressure automatically every 15 minutes during the day and every 30 minutes during the night. And the next day, the patient brings back the device to your office. You download it onto your computer and you get 70 to 80 readings. The average of these readings is regarded as the gold standard, the most accurate way of measuring blood pressure. Based on this 24-hour blood pressure device and your office blood pressure, 4 patterns of blood pressure emerge, and they are: when the blood pressure is normal, that is less than 140/90 in your office, in the physician's office, and the blood pressure is normal on the 24-hour blood pressure device, then the patient, you can brand the patient as normotensive. He does not have hypertension. But when the blood pressure is high in your office, but it was normal on the 24-hour blood pressure monitor, then he has what is known as the white coat hypertension. Generally, there are no guidelines to treat this entity because generally it is regarded as sort of benign. When the blood pressure is high, elevated, both in your clinic as well as on the 24-hour blood pressure monitor, then this patient has sustained hypertension and it needs to be treated. If the blood pressure is elevated at home but it is normal, and this happens many times in many patients, then it is called as the masked hypertension. 8 to 10% of the patients with in the general population have been found to have masked hypertension. So what are the indications for performing a 24-hour blood pressure monitor in a patient with hypertension? Recently, the British guidelines came out on hypertension, and they advise that anybody who is diagnosed with a new onset of hypertension should undergo a 24-hour blood pressure monitoring to make sure that this patient truly has hypertension or not. But there are other indications also to measure 24-hour blood pressure monitor. One is whenever the patient complains that, no doc, my blood pressure is only high, elevated in your office, I've checked it at home, I've checked it at my friend's place, I've checked it at a pharmacy nearby, and the blood pressure was normal, then probably he has white coat hypertension, and to confirm this diagnosis, he needs to undergo a 24-hour blood pressure monitor. The other indication would be you've put him on several medications, 5 medications, 6 medications, and you know this patient is taking these medications, and so you want to confirm, is this patient having truly a resistant hypertension or not? So that would be an indication to check hypertension, to check resistant hypertension with a 24-hour blood pressure monitor. A patient may complain of hypotensive symptoms. He said his blood pressure is very well controlled in your office, but he says, you know what, frequently I feel very tired. I feel whenever I get out of bed, I feel giddy. So those are the signs of orthostasis. Maybe you're giving him too much medications, and that's where a 24-hour blood pressure monitor will help you to clarify what the problem is. Some patients may complain of episodic hypertension. For example, patient with pheochromocytoma may say, once in a day I get this uncontrolled accelerated hypertension with palpitations. Or a patient who may not have pheochromocytoma but stress or anxiety may develop a paroxysmal hypertension. It's better to check it out with a 24-hour blood pressure monitor and then treat them. Some patients develop autonomic dysfunction, especially now that we have a very high prevalence of diabetes. A lot of patients will have autonomic dysfunction and develop orthostatic hypotension because of that. So they need to be carefully monitored on a 24-hour monitor to make sure that your medications are not harming them rather than helping them. Did your history and physical, you've arrived at the diagnosis of hypertension. The next step would be to stage the severity of hypertension. So slide here is from JNC 7, once again the US guidelines that we are following. What JNC 7 did was something unusual. They created a new category called prehypertension. Okay? This was not known before 2003. This is the first time they came out with this. A lot of controversy surrounding this new category. So hypertension is 140 systolic, 90 diastolic and above. But this new category, prehypertension, is 120 to 139 of systolic, okay, and 80 to 89 of diastolic. The reason for creating this category of prehypertension was that one study that I alluded to before by Dr. Wasson from Framingham, who showed that if left alone, we all go on to 95% of us go on to develop hypertension at some point of our life, mostly 15 years after crossing the age of 60. Okay. So what JNC thought was, if we are going to develop it anyway, why not those who are at a higher risk for developing hypertension early intervene, change their life, modify their lifestyle and improve blood pressure control so that they don't go on to develop true hypertension. That's why this category came in. There are some studies actually that have shown that if you are put on some antihypertensives early, a trophy trial came out a few years ago, then you may be able to prevent development of hypertension. But let's not go into that controversy. What we have to know is prehypertension is a good warning sign for our patients that in a few years they are at a very high risk of developing hypertension, so they need to change their lifestyle and modify their lifestyle. Stage 1, as you can see here, is 140 to 159 of systolic or diastolic of 90 to 99. This stage 2 is 160 or above systolic and 100 or above diastolic. Now, among the diagnostic tests, a new patient, when you see him and you diagnose him with hypertension, a few tests are warranted. One is simple urine analysis that will tell you if there is any proteinuria. Okay? Proteinuria occurs when there is target organ damage. So there are 3 targets of hypertension. that you have to know about. One is heart, kidney and brain. So proteinuria will indicate there's already damage to the kidney and you need to be more aggressive. You also look at serum potassium. This will help you. If there is inappropriately low potassium, less than 3 milliequivalent per liter, okay, and that's spontaneous, not because he's on a medication like a diuretic, okay, then that's an indicator that probably this patient has an hyperaldosterone state and needs to be evaluated for it, okay, because that will once again tell you if the kidney is damaged secondary to hypertension. Check for CBP, complete blood picture. If the patient has polycythemia or very high level of hemoglobin, then probably that could polycythemia is leading to hypertension, and polycythemia once again could be secondary to sleep apnea. Get an electrocardiogram done to make sure he does not have LVH, because you diagnose this patient with hypertension now, but he may have had it for a long time and the target organ damage has already started and this patient has already developed concentric hypertrophy. So you need to be very aggressive with these patients and not wait for modifying the diet or lifestyle. And fasting lipid profile is also important, because most of the time we see that those who develop hypertension have some degree of dyslipidemia too that needs to be corrected for a good control of blood pressure. Coming to the treatment of hypertension, it is very clear from clinical trials that if you treat hypertension to the goal, then you can reduce stroke by 40%, the risk of coronary artery disease by 20%, the risk of congestive heart failure by 50%, and you can slow down the progression of kidney disease. This is a very neat diagram which is present on the NIH website, and what it shows is if you reduce systolic blood pressure by 2 millimeters of mercury, you reduce the risk of dying from stroke by 6 millimeters at 6%, dying from heart disease by 4%. If you reduce systolic blood pressure by 5 millimeters of mercury, then you reduce the risk of dying from stroke by 14% and reduce the risk of dying from coronary heart disease by 9%. It's huge, but few millimeters of mercury can make a huge difference. So the three main pillars of antihypertensive therapy are: one is risk factor modification, second is lifestyle changes, and third is drug therapy. And we'll go a little bit more detail into each one of them. What are the areas that you can help by improve hypertension by modifying the risks? And they are smoking cessation. Okay, quit smoking. That's the most important thing. Second thing is weight loss. Third is improve cholesterol control, lipidemia control. Fourth is improve diabetes control, and finally sleep apnea. Here's a slide from which summarizes data from various trials that showed that lifestyle modification truly and significantly reduces blood pressure. So in this summary, if you reduce weight by 1 kilogram, your blood pressure goes down by 1 millimeter of mercury. So here's a patient sitting in front of you with a blood pressure of 145. He's on 2 medications already, okay, but he's obese. In fact, he has gained more weight in the past year. So what you can tell him is, try and reduce weight by 5 kilograms. Your blood pressure will be controlled. Your blood pressure will go down by 5 millimeters of mercury. So you will be at goal. So it's very important, weight reduction. Second thing is DASH diet. I'll go a little bit more detail in the next slide. But DASH diet is a specific diet that has shown that it can reduce your blood pressure by 8 to 14 millimeters of mercury, systolic blood pressure. Restriction of sodium is very important, especially because 60% of the salt that we eat is hidden from us. We don't even know. So it is very important in the history to ask the patient whether he eats pickles, whether he eats any preserved foods, whether he eats, dines outside often, because when you dine outside often in a restaurant, they put a lot of salt in your food. So it's very important to focus on in your history on the salt intake, because reducing salt will reduce blood pressure as well. And we already know from Guyton's hypothesis that salt plays an important role in development of hypertension. So please be more attentive of the dietary intake of sodium. Physical activity is very important and can reduce weight. Generally, we recommend brisk walking for all our patients. 20 to 30 minutes of walk 4 to 5 times a week is probably good enough to improve blood pressure control. Moderation in alcohol is also important, because excess alcohol could lead to worsening of blood pressure control. I promised you in the last slide that I'll discuss a little bit more in detail about the DASH diet. DASH study was conducted in the early 90s, and the results were published in New England Journal of Medicine about 10 years ago. DASH stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. In this study, what they did was they had 3 different kinds of diets. One was the intervention diet, that's the DASH diet. It consisted of 4 to 5 servings of fruits, 4 to 5 servings of vegetables, low fat dairy products, low salt diet, and these patients avoided red meat. They ate more of poultry and fish. The second diet in this study was a regular American diet. The participants were allowed to eat anything they wanted, and this was provided for during the course of the study. A third group was asked to eat a regular diet but lots of fruits and vegetables. And the results showed that you can see in this that the combination diet, that's the DASH diet, showed that within few weeks the blood pressure started going down. 8 to 14 millimeters of mercury improvement in systolic blood pressure, and it stayed that same way during the course of the study compared to the regular diet. So it is very important that you talk to your patients about the importance of diet and importance of DASH diet. If you go on the internet, if you Google DASH diet, you'll get a lot of recipes that will help you to tailor the food according to the DASH diet. Aerobic exercise, walking, simple walking 20 to 30 minutes a day is important. Anaerobic exercise like weightlifting and all has not been really shown to improve blood pressure control, but it does not mean that it doesn't help in any way. Moderation in alcohol, like I mentioned before, is very good. Not more than 2 drinks per day for men, and 1 to 1.5 drinks of alcohol for women are allowed, because beyond this could lead to uncontrolled hypertension. Which medications to use? There have been a lot of medications over the years, and you can see that as late as 1990s we got the angiotensin receptor blockers too, and in 2007 renin inhibitors were introduced that are the newer line of antihypertensive medications that we use. But if you look at the American guidelines for the past 40 years, and these guidelines are generally based on evidence, and what they have shown is that for the first line, diuretics have always played an important role and were the preferred medications, even in the last JNC 7 that was published in 2003. So in addition to blood pressure medications, in choosing the blood pressure medication, it is also important to look at the compelling indications. Compelling indications means there is evidence that if you are using a certain medication for a certain condition, then it may provide more benefit than any other medication. For example, in heart failure, diuretics are good, beta blockers are good, ACE inhibitors are good, ARBs are good, calcium channel blocker may not be that good. After acute coronary syndrome and MI or angina, beta blockers are good, ACE inhibitors are good, and aldosterone antagonists are good. In those who have diabetes, diuretics, ACE inhibitors are the preferred drugs because they not only protect the heart, but they protect the kidney as well. In patients with chronic kidney disease, once again, ACE inhibitors are the preferred drugs and ARBs are the preferred drugs above any other medication. In those with recurrent stroke, there was a study called PROGRESS trial where they showed that a combination of thiazide diuretic with an ACE inhibitor, phenandropel, reduced the recurrence of stroke by 42%. So this is wonderful, right? So a combination of thiazide diuretic with an ACE inhibitor is a preferred drug in those patients who have had stroke and may help in reducing the recurrence of stroke. What about resistant hypertension? So it is very important before you brand a patient as resistant hypertension to make sure if you are following the guidelines or not. So the guidelines say that you should be on a minimum of 3 medications. That includes a diuretic as well, and still your blood pressure should be elevated, not at goal. Then only you can call him a resistant hypertension. And these medications should be on optimum dose, not that you've put him on 3 different medications on half of their usual doses and now you're saying that his blood pressure is not controlled and he's a resistant hypertensive. That doesn't work. So you have to look at other causes as well, whether you've been measuring blood pressure accurately or not. Is there a white coat hypertension or white coat effect? Is he taking excess salt? You're putting him on a diuretic, but if he is taking a lot of salt, then it would lead to diuretic resistance. So you have to make sure, again, revisit the history, revisit the dietary intake of sodium and try and correct that. Inadequate diuretic therapy. Okay, so I see lots of patients who are referred to me for resistant hypertension, and the patient is taking Lasix, furosemide, 20 or 40 milligram once a day. You know, the Lasix, the word Lasix, the term Lasix says that this medication lasts only for 6 hours. Okay, once those 6 hours are gone, the patient starts reabsorbing all the salt and the blood pressure starts to go up. So if you're putting somebody on Lasix on a regular basis, he should be on at least 3 or 4 times a day for the dose to be effective. So it is important that the therapy is adequate. Make sure there is no diuretic resistance. So you have to make sure that this patient is taking appropriate diuretics or not. Inadequate doses, we discussed this. Compliance, whether the patient is taking these medications regularly or not. You have to also look at the drug interaction. If he is taking a decongestant, then that is bound to increase the blood pressure levels. Or over-the-counter medications like NSAIDs or some certain herbs that he is taking from over-the-counter, that could worsen the blood pressure control. Now, another thing important that we have learned from clinical trials is most of the patients with hypertension require at least 3 medications for good blood pressure control. And here's a summary of some major trials in hypertension performed in the past 10 years. Some FAQs on the management of hypertension. A frequently asked question is, you are a nephrologist, tell me, can I use an ACE inhibitor or an ARB in a patient with CKD? And my answer is this clinical trial that was published in NEJM a few years ago, and what they showed was even in advanced renal insufficiency, you can still use ACE inhibitor and ARB, because remember, most of the patients with CKD die not because of CKD but because of heart disease. So to protect the heart, they should be on the best cardioprotective medication, and ACE inhibitors provide that. The other question is, should beta blocker be the first line of medications or not? So there's a lot of controversy showing that beta blockers may not be that effective antihypertensive medication. So now most of the guidelines update that are coming out show that beta blockers are a compelling indication in those with heart disease and may not be the right choice as the first preferred medication in those with hypertension. Target blood pressure control, that's another controversy. What should be the target? for blood pressure control. Few years ago, I would tell you the lower the better, but the data that's coming out now from recent trials shows that being too aggressive in lowering blood pressure may not be good, especially in those who have severe cardiovascular disease and those who are old patients, because that would lead to reduction in their coronary perfusion, reduction in their kidney blood perfusion, and may lead to adverse effects. So somewhere around 130 over 80 may be a good goal, but it still needs to be clarified in clinical trials. So in summary, hypertension is an important disease, one of the most common diseases that we see in clinical practice. It causes a huge burden on a nation because of cardiovascular morbidity and mortality. Most of the patients with hypertension can be controlled and controlled well, because we have lots of medications now whose effects goes beyond just blood pressure control. They are renoprotective and cardioprotective as well. So we need to be a little bit more careful in evaluating these patients, make sure that we check their blood pressure accurately and follow the guidelines, make sure that they are taking medications accurately, make sure that they are following your guidance and recommendations on lifestyle modification, provide them with appropriate medication based on the comorbid condition, provide them with optimal dose of medication so that their blood pressure is well controlled, make sure they are not having any side effects from the medication that you are doing, make sure they are not becoming orthostatic, because that would lead to fall and other problems in these patients. In summary, blood pressure, hypertension is a manageable problem. All it needs is a little bit of dedication on our part and participation of the patient in their care. Thank you very much.